Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and I am on site in Lisbon, Portugal for a special episode of the podcast for Bio Europe Spring 2026. And with me today is Kashif Sadiq, who is founder and CEO of DenovAI Biotech, a company that believes humanity is on the cusp of a protein design revolution that stands to transform both human health and the world around us. A pleasure to speak with you today, Kashif.
Pleasure to be here, thanks.
So DenovAI is a portfolio company of the unique venture hub Ion Labs, a first of its kind alliance of AstraZeneca, Merck, Pfizer, Teva, the Israel Biotech Fund, Emiti Ventures, and Amazon Web Services, powered by Biomedics with the support of the Israeli government. And DenovAI itself harnesses the power of artificial intelligence and computational molecular biophysics, developing foundational technology platforms that can design proteins de novo, that is to say completely from scratch. Before we dive into that though, Kashif, I was wondering, as we do on the podcast, whether you could give us a brief introduction to yourself and the journey that has led you to today.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. Really, really great to be on the program. So actually my background's in physics. I read natural sciences at Cambridge in the UK, was really into theoretical physics early on from an early age. And then, kind of through the journey of doing physics, I became really interested in, from I would say a couple of the frontiers of physics, which were one to do with fundamental laws of physics and how, theories of everything. But at Cambridge, I became aware of another frontier, which was the frontier of complexity. And that's really like, the science of, even if you know the fundamental laws of the universe, can you use them to actually explain really, really complex systems where, you have multiple different components and coming together to make something that's maybe greater than the sum of the whole. And so that's a very active field of research called complex systems physics. And there, the question really was like, could we really figure out new physics? So that led me on a completely different path. I went to do a PhD at University College London in molecular biophysics and really trying to understand biological systems through the lens of physics because, biological systems are the most complex systems we are aware of. And then that kind of, umbrellaed into a 15-year career in molecular biophysics. We developed a whole bunch of methods in the field, trying to understand proteins in particular, how they work, how they fold, how they fit with each other, how they bind to each other. And then more recently, was at an institute called EMBL, European Molecular Biology Lab in Heidelberg, Germany. And there, my team and I, we invented a solution for protein design, which is the ability to really design proteins, or de novo protein design, the ability to design proteins completely from scratch. And that kind of sent me on a way to really see whether we could make an impact at an industrial level with that. And that's kind of brought me to the founding of DenovAI.
Perfect. Well, perfect as in tell us more about de novo protein design now and what de novo does.
Yeah, sure. So basically, I think like the main thing about de novo protein design is it really transforms the paradigm of how, proteins can be engineered and made. So actually, like, taking a step back, if you think about nature's really been the source of innovation for many, many discoveries. Think about flight and, the development of airplane wings, modeled on, the cross sections of birds' wings and so on. So there's plenty of kind of inspiration there from nature, but really it's been about, the format for invention has really been starting with what nature's invented and then tweaking that to our own purposes, right? And the same is true with biologics engineering. So like you start off with, or designing proteins, you kind of start off with what nature has already explored or what evolution has already explored. And then you try to tweak that to make the kinds of molecules you want. Well, what de novo protein design does is really invert that paradigm. So rather than being limited to what nature has already invented, we could search this incredibly vast space of potential sequence space, protein sequence space, to really design from scratch completely new proteins that evolution or nature never, ever invented. And it's from that kind of huge source of potential proteins that we can really find solutions to all the kinds of molecules that we want to create to do various different functions and purposes.
Thank you. So if we get into the finer details of that, What can you share with us about DenovAI's AI-based platform for rapid de novo biologics discovery?
Yeah, sure. So traditionally, biologics discovery has really been a search problem. It's really required, getting nature to really make billions of molecules, either through, phage display libraries or through immunization campaigns. And the idea has really been, to make, get nature to do that work and then start to tweak iteratively to try to make the molecules we want, right? So what we're doing at DenovAI is very different. It's much more about completely engineering and creating molecules from our AI platform, our AI physics platform, I should say, completely from scratch. And so not really relying on what nature's made, but creating molecules from a sequence space that is very different to what nature has already come up with. And yet being able to come up with novel molecules like mini proteins, nanobodies, and antibodies whose sequences are very new and don't exist in nature, and can actually therefore help to bind to targets that have never been even accessible before. And that's something that's fundamentally new.
Complex indeed, exciting indeed. So let's move the conversation to another source of excitement at the moment. Goes without saying, as our listeners know, we're on site in Lisbon for Bio Europe Spring. I was just wondering if you could share with us what you've been hearing on the ground here in terms of the trends that both listeners are perhaps not aware of, having not been able to come here, and also the trends that have perhaps sparked something in your physics complex systems brain that DenovAI operates so brilliantly off of.
Very, very happy to go into that. So I think one of the key trends that we see happening is really now the final kind of integration of AI discovery-based methods into, I would say, the wider biotech ecosystem. So I think what happened, a few years ago, I think there was a perception that, this kind of AI revolution, is treated as some kind of curious periphery concept. And then there was a huge amount of influx of, investment into the field and kind of excitement into the field, which might have not been kind of aligned with the maturity of the field. And so I think then you had this kind of opposite effect where, people thought, well, AI is probably not going to do much at all. And actually now I think what we're finding is that the field has matured enough that real solutions are being developed, and that they can now actually, rather than the kind of concept where, I would say more like the hypey concept where you just have a button and it solves absolutely everything. I think there's more the realization that what AI stands to bring to the field, especially in AI biologics discovery, is a real acceleration of discovery, but in a way that really fits into the ecosystem rather than just completely replacing it. Now, I'll give you an exact example from what we are doing at DenovAI. And as you mentioned earlier, we're part of, the Ion Labs Venture Studio. So we've got a really keen insight by working with several major pharma companies like AstraZeneca, Teva, Pfizer, and so on, Merck and so on, and who are all invested in DenovAI, that we have access to, the R&D teams of these companies. So we know very well what the R&D teams of major pharma companies are really looking out for. And that's actually really helped to shape our vision, which is actually of what we call one-shot design. So one-shot design is really the ability to not only create molecules de novo, and therefore completely transform hit discovery, which used to be about screening billions of molecules, into a very accurate process where you can only design a few molecules, and those are already real-world hits and candidates, but also being able to unify what is hit discovery with the next phase of development, which is lead optimization. Now, lead optimization is where, you would start with a binder and then you would optimize that binder iteratively to have all of the properties that you'd want to see in a therapeutic candidate. And that stage can, hit discovery could take months, and then lead optimization could take many months, if not a couple of years. And what we're doing at DenovAI is really saying we could replace all of that with a single unified framework for design that does not only hit discovery, but also a big chunk of lead optimization, so that the molecules that we design right from the get-go are not only binders, but have many of the features that you already want to see in a therapeutic candidate, whether that's, the right, affinity or the correct solubility or having a low immunogenic footprint and so on. And we believe that that's actually the kind of relevant solution that pharma is really looking for, rather than just another tool that kind of does some of the job, but not all of it.
Yeah, all in one, as you say.
Exactly. Yeah. Well
Great.
put.
So is there anything further you'd like to share about what's coming up for DenovAI?
Oh, well, we're looking forward to a very exciting year in 2026. So, we've been around since 2023. The first couple of years were really kind of putting our platform through its paces, developing that. And this year is really going to see a transition into more kind of commercial partnerships. And so, really the take home is that, DenovAI is open for business. We'd love to form partnerships with, pharma companies and biotech companies as we, hope to bring real value to the industry.
Wonderful. And lastly, and more generally, what are your future hopes for de novo discovery and design in the life sciences?
Yeah, sure. So that's a big question. I think we're really just at the beginning of the de novo protein design journey. I know, there's huge amounts of development going on very fast, but I still think we're early in the journey. And the reason I say that is because if you think about what we're making at the moment, we're really designing new Lego pieces from scratch. Now think about, and then we're interfering with biology at this kind of molecular level where each of the molecules are like individual Lego pieces. Now imagine that you scale up from that and say, what could you do if you could not only invent the Lego pieces, but figure out ways to put them together in all kinds of assembling ways, right? And then you think, then the design possibilities are pretty much limitless. And that would give us the ability to not only interfere, with biological systems through, signaling or sensing or, kind of very complex pathways, but would basically allow us to intervene with biology on a fundamentally new level that we've never been able to do with before, by actually having real complex systems made from these individually designed Lego pieces. And I think that's going to be a fantastic transformative future for human health, and actually more broadly for the entire biosphere, because wherever you have proteins, wherever you have the biosphere, you have proteins. So, it's not just about healthcare. It's about, the agri-tech. It's about, food diversity and food security. It's about, sustainable materials and so on. So everywhere where you can think where proteins could be useful, I think we're going to have that transformation.
Well, here's to that limitlessness. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been fun.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.